The Krillian Empire had ruled the Outer Rim territories for 3 centuries, their crimson warships casting shadows across 1,000 worlds. Their military doctrine was simple: overwhelming force, no survivors, complete subjugation. It had worked perfectly until they encountered humanity. Commander Marcus Reaper Kane floated in the wreckage of the UES Defender, his environmental suit's emergency beacon broadcasting on all frequencies. The massive Krillian dreadnought Vorthax Fury hung motionless 3 kilometers away, its hull scarred but victorious. Through his helmet's display, Marcus could see the scattered debris of what had once been humanity's most advanced destroyer. The ambush had been perfect. The Krillians had used a fake distress signal to lure the Defender into the asteroid field of the Xerion system. When Captain Rodriguez had ordered the ship to investigate, they'd walked straight into a trap. 16 Krillian cruisers had emerged from behind the largest asteroids, their plasma cannons already charging. Marcus had been in the ship's armory when the first volley hit. The explosion that tore through the port side had launched him into space, along with half the weapons deck. His SEAL training had kicked in immediately: seal the suit, check systems, assess the situation. The assessment wasn't good. The Defender was gone, its reactor core dark. The escape pods had been targeted and destroyed before they could clear the blast radius. As far as he could tell, he was the only survivor. Through his comm system, he could hear the Krillian victory chants echoing across the debris field. Their guttural language was harsh, but the universal translator in his helmet made their words crystal clear. "The human's greatest warship burns like paper," General Thax's voice boomed from the dreadnought's communication array. "Let this message carry to every world in their pathetic coalition. The Krillian Empire is unstoppable." Marcus gritted his teeth. The Defender hadn't been humanity's greatest warship. It was barely a mid-tier destroyer. But he understood the propaganda value. The Krillians had been testing human resolve for months, probing their defenses, studying their tactics. This victory would embolden them to launch a full-scale invasion of human space. His suit's heads-up display showed multiple Krillian shuttles moving through the debris field, their crews methodically destroying anything that might contain useful technology or intelligence. Standard Krillian doctrine: leave nothing for the enemy to recover. They would be thorough, which gave Marcus perhaps 20 minutes before they reached his position. 20 minutes to do what exactly? His sidearm had been lost in the explosion. His combat knife was still mag-locked to his thigh, but that wouldn't do much good against an entire fleet. The emergency beacon in his suit would eventually bring a human rescue ship, but not for days. By then, the Krillians would be long gone, and the invasion fleet would already be mobilizing. Marcus activated his suit's passive sensors and began scanning the debris field. There, a section of the Defender's hull that had broken away cleanly, still showing some power signatures. If he was lucky, it might contain something useful. He triggered his suit's maneuvering thrusters and began moving through the wreckage, using larger pieces of debris for cover. The hull section turned out to be part of the ship's secondary armory. The outer blast doors had been torn away, but the inner storage compartments were intact. Marcus smiled grimly as he saw what was inside. The Defender had been carrying a full complement of Mark VII tactical nuclear mines, each one roughly the size of a briefcase and packed with enough antimatter to crack a small moon. He carefully extracted one of the mines from its storage rack, checking its status display. Green across the board. The weapon was fully operational, with a maximum yield of 50 megatons. More than enough to take out a Krillian dreadnought, if he could get it close enough. The problem was delivery. The mine's maximum effective range was only 2 kilometers, and it needed to be within direct line of sight of the target for the targeting system to lock on. The Krillian ship was 3 kilometers away, and its point defense systems would obliterate anything larger than a pebble that approached from the debris field. Marcus studied the tactical situation. The Vorthax Fury was maintaining position near the largest asteroid, using it as cover while the smaller ships conducted their salvage operations. The dreadnought's shields were down, a sign of Krillian arrogance. They didn't consider the debris field to pose any threat. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Marcus began modifying the mine's targeting system, linking it to his suit's navigation computer. If he could get within range, he could paint the target with his suit's laser designator and guide the weapon home. The trick would be getting close enough without being detected. He spent the next 10 minutes carefully plotting a course through the debris field, using his suit's computer to calculate the optimal path. The route would take him through the densest part of the wreckage, using the twisted metal and ceramic fragments as cover. It was dangerous. One wrong move could send him spinning into open space, but it was his only chance. As he prepared to move out, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. General Thax was transmitting on an open channel, his voice filled with cruel satisfaction. "Attention, human survivors," the Krillian commander said. "We know you are listening. We know some of you escaped this battle. Let this be a lesson to your species. The Krillian Empire shows no mercy to those who resist us. But we are not without compassion. Surrender your remaining ships. Abandon your colonies, and we will allow your people to live as slaves. Refuse, and we will turn every human world into glass." The general paused, letting his words sink in. "You have 7 of your days to respond. After that, we begin with your capital world. Earth, I believe you call it. Such a pretty blue planet. It will burn beautifully." Marcus felt rage building in his chest. These bastards thought they could intimidate humanity with threats and displays of force. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Humans didn't surrender, they didn't break, and they sure as hell didn't go quietly into slavery. He secured the nuclear mine to his suit's equipment harness and began moving through the debris field. The twisted wreckage of the Defender provided perfect cover, its hull plates and structural beams creating a maze of metal that would confuse most sensors. Marcus had trained for this kind of operation dozens of times. Moving through hostile territory without detection was a basic SEAL skill. The first few hundred meters went smoothly. The Krillian salvage teams were focused on the larger pieces of wreckage, methodically cutting them apart with plasma torches and loading the useful components into their shuttles. They weren't expecting resistance from the debris field itself. Marcus paused behind a section of the ship's main corridor, checking his suit's sensors. The Vorthax Fury was now only 1.8 kilometers away, well within the mine's effective range, but he needed to get closer. The targeting system worked best at point-blank range, and he wanted to make sure the weapon would penetrate the ship's shields before detonating. As he prepared to move to the next piece of cover, Marcus heard voices on the Krillian comm channels. 2 of their shuttles were moving in his direction, their crews discussing the strange energy readings they'd detected from his section of the debris field. His suit's reactor might be running too hot, creating a thermal signature that their sensors could pick up. Marcus quickly shut down all non-essential systems, reducing his suit's power output to the absolute minimum. The life support systems would keep running for another 6 hours, but everything else, sensors, communications, even the heating elements, went dark. In the vacuum of space, with the nearest star over 1 billion kilometers away, the cold began seeping through his suit's insulation almost immediately. The Krillian shuttles moved closer, their searchlights cutting through the debris field like silver knives. Marcus pressed himself against a piece of hull plating, holding perfectly still as the lights passed over his position. The shuttles hovered for several minutes, their crews scanning the wreckage with handheld sensors. One of the Krillian soldiers was getting suspicious. Marcus could hear him arguing with his team leader over the comm, insisting that the energy readings indicated something was alive in the debris field. The team leader was dismissive. What could survive in the vacuum of space? But the suspicious soldier wasn't giving up. He was moving closer. His sensor readings getting stronger. Marcus made a decision. He couldn't let them find him, not when he was so close to the target. Moving with the fluid precision that had made him one of the Navy's top operators, he drew his combat knife and triggered his suit's thrusters. The Krillian soldier never saw him coming. Marcus emerged from behind the debris like a ghost, his knife punching through the alien's environmental suit just below the helmet seal. The soldier's death was silent and quick. His companion, focused on his own sensor readings, didn't notice anything was wrong until Marcus was already behind him. 2 down. But the shuttle crew would notice when their teammates didn't check in. Marcus had maybe 5 minutes before the alarm was raised. He began moving again, pushing through the debris field with renewed urgency. The Vorthax Fury was now less than a kilometer away, its massive hull filling his field of view. The ship was even larger than he'd thought, nearly 2 kilometers long and bristling with weapons. Taking it down would cripple Krillian operations in this sector for months. Marcus found his position behind a section of the Defender's engine assembly, the twisted wreckage providing perfect cover while giving him a clear line of sight to the enemy dreadnought. He carefully armed the nuclear mine, its status display shifting from yellow to red as the antimatter containment field stabilized. The weapon was ready. Through his helmet's display, Marcus could see Krillian crew members moving around the dreadnought's hull, conducting post-battle maintenance. They had no idea that death was floating in the debris field. Less than 1,000 meters away, he activated his suit's targeting system and painted the Vorthax Fury with his laser designator. The mine's guidance system locked on immediately, its internal computer calculating the optimal trajectory to the target. Marcus set the timer for 30 seconds, enough time for the weapon to clear the debris field and penetrate the ship's shields before detonating. His finger hovered over the launch button. "This is for Earth," Marcus whispered, "and for the Defender." He pressed the button. The mine launched from his position with a barely visible flash of thruster exhaust, accelerating toward the Krillian dreadnought on a pillar of superheated plasma. For a moment, everything was silent. The mine was too small and moving too fast for the Krillian sensors to detect. Then the alarm started screaming across every Krillian comm channel. Someone on the Vorthax Fury had spotted the incoming projectile. Point defense turrets swiveled toward the mine, their targeting computers struggling to lock onto something so small and fast. Plasma bolts began filling the space between the dreadnought and the debris field, trying to intercept the weapon before it reached its target. Marcus watched with grim satisfaction as the mine weaved between the defensive fire, its guidance system making micro-corrections to keep it on course. The Krillians were good, but they weren't good enough. The mine slipped through their defenses like a ghost, penetrating the dreadnought's shields just as the antimatter containment field collapsed. The explosion lit up the entire asteroid field like a second sun. 50 megatons of pure destruction erupted from the heart of the Vorthax Fury, tearing the massive ship apart from the inside. The dreadnought's hull cracked like an eggshell, its superstructure collapsing as secondary explosions rippled through the ship's reactor core. When the light faded, nothing remained of the Krillian flagship but expanding clouds of superheated gas and metal fragments. The other ships in the fleet were already turning toward the debris field, their weapons charging and their crews screaming for revenge. Marcus smiled coldly as he watched them come. Let them come. He still had 11 more mines in the armory section and plenty of time to put them to good use. The Krillians wanted to know what human resistance looked like. He was about to show them. The remaining Krillian ships descended on the debris field like angry hornets, their searchlights cutting through the darkness as they hunted for the source of their flagship's destruction. Marcus counted 15 vessels, cruisers mostly, with a handful of destroyers and frigates. Still more than enough firepower to glass a planet, but without their dreadnought, they'd lost their command and control capabilities. Admiral Vexhai, commanding the cruiser Death's Edge, was screaming orders over the comm channels. The Krillian military hierarchy was brutally simple. When your superior died, you took command and avenged them, or you died trying. Failure meant execution, if you were lucky. Dishonor meant something much worse. "Spread out!" Vexhi's voice crackled with rage and desperation. "Grid search pattern! Whatever destroyed the Vorthak's fury is hiding in that debris field. Find it and destroy it!" Marcus was already moving to his next position, carrying 2 more mines through the twisted wreckage of the Defender. The explosion of the dreadnought had shifted the debris field, creating new paths and hiding spots. But it had also alerted the enemy to his presence. The Krillians were being more careful now, sending armed boarding parties into the larger pieces of wreckage while their ships provided overwatch. He found cover behind what had once been the Defender's main computer core, its quantum processors dark and lifeless. From here, he could see 3 Krillian cruisers moving in formation, their hulls scarred but weapons ready. They were maintaining a careful distance from each other, smart, tactical thinking that would prevent a single mine from taking out multiple ships. But Marcus had been planning for this. He'd spent the last hour rigging the remaining mines with proximity detonators, turning each one into a space-based, improvised explosive device. The weapons were no longer guided missiles. They were bombs, waiting for the right moment to detonate. And Marcus had learned something important about Krillian tactical doctrine during his years studying their military strategies. They always regrouped after taking casualties. The first mine was already in position, mag-locked to a piece of debris along the cruiser's projected path. The second mine went into a different location, 50 kilometers away, but along the same general heading. Marcus was creating a trap, using the Krillians' own predictable behavior against them. He activated his suit's passive sensors and settled in to wait. The cold was getting worse. His suit's heating elements had been offline for over 2 hours now, and the vacuum of space was slowly stealing his body heat. His fingers were going numb inside his gloves, and his breath was forming ice crystals on his helmet's faceplate. But SEALs were trained to operate in extreme conditions. A little cold wasn't going to stop him. The Krillian search pattern was methodical, but flawed. They were treating the debris field like a traditional battlefield, expecting their enemy to behave like a conventional military force. They didn't understand that they were hunting a ghost, someone who had been trained to survive behind enemy lines with nothing but his wits and whatever weapons he could improvise. The first cruiser, Blood Talon, was approaching the mine's position exactly as Marcus had predicted. The ship's commander was following standard Krillian doctrine, maintaining a steady course while his sensors swept the debris ahead. The mine's magnetic clamps would activate when the ship passed within 50 meters, attaching the weapon to the cruiser's hull. Marcus watched through his scope as the Blood Talon closed the distance. 500 meters, 400, 300. The mine was completely invisible against the backdrop of twisted metal and ceramic fragments. 200 meters, 100. The magnetic clamps engaged with a soft click that Marcus felt through his suit's contact with the debris. The mine was now attached to the Krillian cruiser's hull, its proximity sensors counting down to detonation. 50 seconds until the antimatter containment field collapsed. The Blood Talon continued on its patrol route, its crew completely unaware that death was riding along with them. Marcus began moving toward his next position, timing his movement to coincide with the explosion. When the mine detonated, the chaos and confusion would provide perfect cover for his relocation. 40 seconds, 30, 20. Marcus was pressed against a section of hull plating when the mine exploded. Even at a distance of several kilometers, the flash was bright enough to temporarily overload his helmet's light filters. The Blood Talon simply vanished, consumed by the same kind of antimatter explosion that had destroyed the dreadnought. The other Krillian ships immediately broke formation, scattering like startled fish as their commanders tried to figure out what was happening. Admiral Vexhi's voice was shrill with panic as he screamed orders at his subordinates. "All ships, evasive maneuvers. We're under attack by some kind of stealth weapons platform." Marcus almost smiled. A stealth weapons platform. If only they knew they were being hunted by a single human with a bag of improvised explosives. The second mine detonated 20 minutes later, taking out the destroyer Scarmaker as it investigated the wreckage of the Blood Talon. This time, Marcus was close enough to see the ship's crew through the bridge windows in the seconds before the explosion. Their faces were twisted with confusion and fear, emotions that Krillian warriors were taught to suppress from birth. Fear was a human emotion, they believed. Krillians knew only rage and bloodlust. But Marcus was teaching them something new. 2 ships down, 13 to go. Admiral Vex High was learning, though. After the second explosion, he pulled his remaining ships back to a safe distance and began bombarding the debris field with plasma cannons. The plan was simple. Destroy everything large enough to hide a weapon and eliminate the threat through brute force. It wasn't a bad strategy, but it had one major flaw. Marcus wasn't hiding in the debris field anymore. While the Krillians focused their attention on the wreckage of the Defender, Marcus had used his suit's thrusters to quietly relocate to a completely different part of the asteroid field. The rocky fragments provided excellent cover, and the natural magnetic interference from the asteroid's iron content would mask his suit's emissions from most sensors. More importantly, the asteroids gave him access to raw materials. Marcus had found what he was looking for on the third asteroid, a small mining station that had been abandoned when the war started. The facility's reactor was cold, but its fabrication equipment was still functional. With a few modifications, Marcus could use the station's mass drivers to launch his remaining mines at much greater velocities than their built-in propulsion systems allowed. It took 3 hours to rig the system, working in complete vacuum with tools he'd salvaged from the mining station's maintenance shop. The mass drivers were designed to launch ore containers toward processing ships, but with some creative engineering, they could launch nuclear mines just as effectively. By the time Admiral Vex High realized his bombardment wasn't working, Marcus was ready for the next phase of his operation. The Krillian commander had regrouped his ships into a defensive formation, keeping them in constant motion to prevent another stealth attack. It was sound tactical thinking, but it also made them predictable. Marcus spent another hour studying their movement patterns, using the mining station's passive sensors to track each ship's position and heading. The third mine launched at 0800 hours, accelerated to nearly 10% of light speed by the mining station's mass driver. At that velocity, it crossed the distance to the Krillian formation in less than 2 seconds, far too fast for their point defense systems to intercept. The cruiser Bone Crusher disappeared in a flash of annihilation energy, its hull vaporized before the crew could even realize they were under attack. The explosion was so violent that it damaged 2 nearby frigates, sending them tumbling through space with their hulls cracked and their life support systems failing. Admiral Vex High's response was immediate and predictable. He ordered his remaining ships to converge on the mining station, their weapons charging as they prepared to reduce the facility to cosmic dust. But Marcus was already 3 steps ahead. The fourth mine launched before the Krillians could bring their weapons to bear, followed by the fifth and sixth in rapid succession. The mass driver could cycle every 30 seconds, turning the mining station into an improvised artillery platform. The frigate, Swift Death, took the fourth mine amidships, its reactor core breaching in a cascade of secondary explosions. The fifth mine caught the destroyer Paingiver as it tried to evade, tearing through its shields like they were made of paper. The sixth mine missed its primary target, but detonated close enough to the cruiser Warbringer to disable its engines and leave it drifting helplessly. In less than 5 minutes, Marcus had reduced the Krillian force from 13 ships to 7. But now they knew where he was, and they were closing fast. The mining station's shields couldn't withstand the combined firepower of 7 warships. Marcus had maybe 60 seconds before the facility was destroyed, taking him with it. But he had one more card to play. The mining station's reactor was an older model, stable and reliable, but not particularly efficient. With the right modifications, though, it could be turned into something much more dangerous. Marcus had been working on the reactor's control systems while the mass driver launched its deadly cargo, preparing for this exact moment. He activated the emergency release on the reactor's magnetic containment system and triggered the station's self-destruct sequence. Then he grabbed his remaining mines and sprinted for the station's emergency escape pod, his suit's thrusters firing at maximum burn. The pod cleared the station with less than 10 seconds to spare. Behind him, the mining facility's reactor went supercritical, releasing the energy equivalent of a small star. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away, a brilliant nova that lit up the asteroid field like daylight. When the radiation cleared, the mining station was gone. So were 4 of the 7 remaining Krillian ships, caught too close to the blast zone when the reactor breached. The 3 survivors, 2 frigates and a single cruiser, were drifting in space with their systems overloaded and their crews unconscious. Marcus smiled as he floated in his escape pod, watching the crippled Krillian vessels through his scope. 7 ships down, 7 to go. But the real message he was sending wouldn't be understood until the survivors limped back to Krillian space and reported what they'd seen. A single human had destroyed an entire battle group using nothing but determination, creativity, and an understanding of how to turn any environment into a weapon. The Krillians had claimed victory over a seal. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The 3 surviving Krillian ships drifted through the aftermath of the mining station's destruction like wounded animals. Their shields were down, their weapons systems were offline, and their crews were slowly regaining consciousness after being knocked out by the electromagnetic pulse of the reactor breach. Admiral Vexhai, his bridge scorched and half his crew dead, stared at his tactical display with growing horror. 16 ships. They had started this hunt with 16 ships, including one of the Empire's most powerful dreadnoughts. Now he had 3 barely functional vessels and maybe 200 surviving crew members. The human responsible for this carnage was still out there, still armed, and apparently still had more tricks up his sleeve. Marcus Kane floated in his escape pod 3,000 kilometers away, using the craft's passive sensors to monitor Krillian communications. The aliens were terrified. He could hear it in their voices. They'd never faced an enemy like this before, someone who turned their own tactical doctrine against them and seemed to anticipate their every move. But Marcus wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The escape pod's small fabrication unit had been designed to create basic survival equipment, but Marcus had other ideas. Using components salvaged from his remaining mines and the pod's own systems, he was building something that would have made his instructors at SEAL training proud, a weapon that existed purely in the realm of psychological warfare. The Krillian military mentality was built around concepts of honor, strength, and overwhelming force. They understood frontal assaults, ship-to-ship combat, and the kind of brutal efficiency that had conquered half the galaxy. What they didn't understand was asymmetric warfare, the art of making your enemy defeat themselves through fear and confusion. Marcus finished his construction and smiled coldly. The device looked innocent enough, a small cylindrical object about the size of a coffee can with a simple timer mechanism and a basic transmitter. But what it would do to Krillian morale would be devastating. He launched the device toward the nearest frigate, the Razor Wind, using the escape pod's maneuvering thrusters to give it just enough velocity to reach the ship. The cylinder attached itself to the frigate's hull with a soft magnetic clamp, invisible to the crew inside, but clearly visible to anyone conducting an external inspection. Then Marcus activated his comm system and broadcast on all Krillian military frequencies. "This is Commander Kane, United Earth Navy," his voice echoed through the damaged ships. "I know you're listening. I know you're scared. And I know you're starting to realize that you made a very serious mistake when you decided to threaten my homeworld." Admiral Vexhai's response was immediate and filled with rage. "Human! Face me in honorable combat. Stop hiding like a coward and— Marcus cut him off. Admiral, look at your remaining ships. Really look at them. How many crew members do you have left? How many functional weapons? How many ways can you die in the next 10 minutes? The Krillian commander was silent for a moment. Marcus could picture him frantically checking his tactical displays, trying to figure out where the human was and how he could be stopped. The device I just attached to the Razor Wind, Marcus continued, is not a bomb. It's something much worse. It's a message, and in about 60 seconds, everyone in this star system is going to understand exactly what happens when you threaten Earth. The timer on the device was counting down, visible to any Krillian who looked out a viewport on the correct side of the ship. Marcus could hear panicked voices over the comm channels as crew members spotted the cylinder and reported its presence to their officers. 50 seconds. 40. 30. You want to know why humans are dangerous? Marcus asked, his voice calm and conversational. It's not because we're stronger than you, or faster, or better armed. It's because we adapt, we improvise. We turn every disadvantage into an advantage, and every weapon you use against us into a weapon we use against you. 20 seconds. 10. The device activated with a soft click, but instead of exploding, it began broadcasting. The signal was weak but clear, a recording of Earth's radio transmissions from the past year, news broadcasts, music, television shows, and most importantly, emergency military communications from the colonies that had been attacked by Krillian raiders, the voices of human children crying for their parents, the last transmissions from outposts that had been destroyed, the desperate pleas for help from civilians who had been caught in Krillian bombardments. But mixed in with the tragedy were other sounds. The voices of human soldiers preparing for battle, the roar of engines as relief ships launched toward the attack sites, the calm, professional communications of rescue teams pulling survivors from the wreckage of destroyed cities. And underneath it all, something that made every Krillian warrior who heard it stop what they were doing and listen in growing dread, the sound of humanity refusing to break. Those are the voices of my people, Marcus said quietly. Every man, woman, and child you've killed, every colony you've burned, every ship you've destroyed. They're all here, Admiral. They're all listening, and they're all waiting for me to send you home with a message. The recording played for exactly 10 minutes, long enough for every surviving Krillian to hear it, long enough for them to understand what they were really fighting against. When it ended, the silence that followed was deafening. Marcus let that silence stretch for a full minute before he spoke again. I could kill the rest of you right now, he said. I have 4 mines left, and your ships are sitting ducks, but I'm not going to do that. Do you know why? Admiral Vexhigh's voice was barely a whisper. Why? Because I want you to go home. I want you to tell your high command exactly what happened here. I want you to describe how a single human destroyed your entire battle group with improvised weapons and basic tactics. And most importantly, I want you to deliver a message to whoever gave the order to threaten Earth. Marcus paused, making sure his words would sink in. The message is simple. Humanity doesn't surrender. We don't break. We don't negotiate with bullies, and we sure as hell don't kneel to anyone. You want a war with Earth? You've got one. But it's not going to be the kind of war you're used to fighting. The Krillian admiral was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all of its earlier arrogance. What? What kind of war? The kind where every human becomes a weapon, Marcus replied. The kind where every colony becomes a fortress, every asteroid becomes a missile, and every piece of space junk becomes a bomb. The kind where you win every battle and still lose the war because no matter how many of us you kill, there's always one more human out there with a knife and a grudge. Marcus began moving away from the debris field, using his escape pod's engines to put distance between himself and the surviving Krillian ships. But he wasn't finished with his psychological warfare. You know what the funny thing is, Admiral? I'm not even a soldier. Not really. I'm a Navy SEAL, one of maybe 3,000 humans with my particular training. Do you know what we specialize in? What? Vexhi's voice was barely audible. We specialize in teaching other people how to fight like us. And right now, there are recruitment centers opening on every human world, looking for volunteers who want to learn how to do exactly what I just did to your fleet. That wasn't strictly true. Marcus had no idea what Earth's military response would be to the Krillian threat, but he didn't need to tell the truth. He just needed to plant seeds of doubt that would grow into terror when the survivors returned home. One last thing, Marcus said as his escape pod disappeared into the asteroid field. Tell your high command that Earth remembers everything. Every attack, every colony burned, every civilian killed. We're keeping score, and when this war is over, there's going to be a reckoning. He cut the transmission and powered down his comm system, leaving the Krillians alone with their fear and their damaged ships. Behind him, Admiral Vexhi was screaming orders at his remaining crews, trying to get their vessels operational enough to limp back to Krillian space. Marcus settled back in his pilot seat and began plotting a course to the nearest human outpost. He had a lot of work to do, intelligence reports to file, tactical analyses to write, and most importantly, training programs to design. Because everything he'd just told the Krillians was about to become true. The escape pod's long-range sensors detected another ship approaching from the edge of the system. A human rescue vessel responding to the emergency beacon from the Defender. Marcus smiled and activated his identification transponder. Soon he'd be back aboard a human ship, surrounded by his own people, planning the next phase of what was going to be a very long and very ugly war. The Krillians had wanted to test human resolve. They were about to get a demonstration that would echo across the galaxy for generations. From his vantage point in the asteroid field, Marcus watched the 3 surviving Krillian ships slowly accelerate toward the jump point that would take them home. They moved like beaten animals, their hulls scarred and their crews broken. Admiral Vexhi had gotten his message all right, but the real message was just beginning. By the time those ships reached Krillian space, word would have spread throughout the Empire about what had happened in the Zarian system, how a single human had turned a routine ambush into a massacre, how Earth's warriors could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish like ghosts. The Krillian High Command would tell themselves it was just one lucky human with access to powerful weapons. They'd convince themselves that conventional tactics would still work against Earth's forces. They'd prepare for the kind of war they understood, fleets facing fleets, planet-to-planet bombardments, the kind of massive conflicts that had given them control over half the galaxy. They had no idea what was actually coming for them. Marcus began composing his after-action report as the rescue ship approached his position. He had a lot to tell Earth's military leadership about Krillian tactics, technology, and most importantly, psychology. But first, he had a more immediate concern. The Krillians had given humanity 7 days to surrender before they began their attack on Earth. That timeline had just changed dramatically. After what happened here, they'd either accelerate their invasion plans or cancel them entirely while they figured out what they were really dealing with. Either way, Earth needed to be ready, and Marcus Kane was going to make sure it was. 3 months later, the Krillian High Command assembled in the war chamber of their fortress world, Kethmore. The massive chamber, carved from solid obsidian and decorated with the skulls of conquered species, had witnessed the planning of 1,000 campaigns. But never before had the assembled generals and admirals looked so uncertain, so afraid. Admiral Vexhi stood before the War Council, his body bearing the scars of his encounter with the human called Reaper. His left arm had been replaced with a cybernetic implant after shrapnel from his ship's bridge had severed the original. His voice, once commanding and proud, now carried a tremor that he couldn't quite suppress. "The human fleet movements have accelerated," he reported, his tactical display showing dozens of red icons spreading throughout the outer territories. They're not following conventional deployment patterns. Instead of massing their forces for a defensive stand, they're scattering small units throughout the contested systems. High General Morthak, Supreme Commander of Krillian military forces, leaned forward in his throne of polished bone. "Explain." "They're copying the tactics used by the one called Kane," Vexhai said, and several council members visibly flinched at the name. "Small units, high mobility, asymmetric warfare. They're turning every asteroid field, every debris cloud, every piece of space junk into a potential weapons platform." The reports had been coming in for weeks. Krillian patrol ships disappearing without a trace. Supply convoys destroyed by improvised weapons that seemed to come from nowhere. Forward bases going dark after reporting strange energy readings in nearby asteroid fields. The humans weren't fighting a conventional war. They were fighting like phantoms, striking without warning and vanishing before retaliation was possible. "It's not just military targets," Admiral Thekmar added, his mandibles clicking nervously. "They're targeting our infrastructure, our supply lines, our communication networks. Last week, they somehow turned one of our own mining platforms into a bomb and used it to destroy an entire logistics fleet." High General Morthak's claws scraped against his throne's armrests. "How many ships have we lost?" The silence that followed was answer enough. In 3 months of what the humans called irregular warfare, the Krillian Empire had lost more vessels than in the previous decade of conventional conflicts. Worse, they couldn't predict when or where the next attack would come. Every patrol mission was a potential death sentence. Every supply run was a game of chance. "The troops are becoming unreliable," Admiral Vexhai admitted quietly. "There have been reports of crews abandoning their ships rather than patrol the contested systems. Some captains are refusing direct orders to investigate distress signals, claiming they're obvious traps." "Cowards!" General Skax roared, slamming his fist against the council table. "Execute them for insubordination." "We've tried that," Vexhai replied. "It only makes the problem worse. The crews know that facing a firing squad is preferable to facing whatever the humans have planned for them out there." High General Morthak stood and walked to the chamber's massive tactical display, which showed the current state of the war. What he saw there made his blood run cold. The red zones indicating human activity were spreading like an infection, consuming system after system. But it wasn't the territory they were losing that worried him. It was the pattern. The humans weren't trying to hold ground. They were doing something much more insidious. They were making space itself hostile to Krillian forces. Every engagement taught them more about Krillian tactics, technology, and psychology. Every successful attack made the next one more sophisticated, and every Krillian victory was somehow turned into a defeat through methods that defied conventional military logic. "Show them the Helix station recording," Morthak ordered. The chamber's lights dimmed as a holographic display activated, showing the interior of Helix Station, a major Krillian refinery complex that had been attacked just 2 days earlier. The recording came from the station's security cameras, capturing the final moments before its destruction. The attack had begun like all the others, with silence. No warning signals, no massed fleet movements, no declaration of intent. The station's crew was going about their normal duties when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red, but by then it was too late. The humans were already inside. The camera feeds showed figures in advanced combat suits moving through the station's corridors like ghosts. They knew exactly where they were going, exactly which systems to target, exactly how to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. But it was their leader that made even the hardened Krillian generals shift uncomfortably in their seats. The figure moved with fluid precision through the station's command center, methodically destroying critical systems with tools that seemed to have been improvised from salvaged equipment. When station security tried to stop him, he simply vanished into the ventilation system, only to reappear behind them moments later. The security footage showed Krillian soldiers, warriors who had never known fear, running in panic from an enemy they couldn't understand. The recording's audio pickup caught his voice as he worked, calm and conversational, as he turned the station's own reactor into a weapon. "Helix Station, this is Commander Kane. You have 10 minutes to evacuate before this facility undergoes rapid unscheduled disassembly. I suggest you take advantage of this generous offer." "How?" Admiral Thekmar whispered, as they watched the human called Reaper single-handedly destroy a facility that housed 10,000 Krillian workers. "How does one person do this?" High General Morthak paused the recording as Kane looked directly into one of the security cameras. The human's face was calm, almost peaceful. But his eyes held something that made even the most battle-hardened Krillian warrior look away. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was something much worse. It was the absolute certainty of someone who knew he was fighting for something worth dying for. "He's not just one person anymore," Morthak said quietly. "Intelligence reports indicate that there are now over 50 humans operating with similar capabilities. They call themselves Reapers, apparently named after this one's unofficial designation. Each team is capable of destroying installations that would normally require an entire fleet to eliminate." The implications were staggering. In just 3 months, humanity had gone from having one exceptional operative to fielding an entire force of them. And if the reports were accurate, they were still recruiting, still training, still expanding their capabilities. "We could accelerate the Earth invasion," General Skak suggested. "Strike at their homeworld before they can deploy more of these units." "With what?" Vexhai asked bitterly. "Half our invasion fleet has been destroyed or damaged by these ghost attacks. The other half is scattered across the Empire trying to protect our supply lines. And even if we could reach Earth, what makes you think these humans haven't turned their entire planet into a trap?" The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. Everyone in the chamber knew that Vexhai was right. The humans had demonstrated an alarming ability to turn any environment into a weapon, any piece of technology into a bomb, any tactical advantage into a devastating defeat. Attacking their heavily defended homeworld would be suicide. "There is another option," High General Morthak said slowly. "We could negotiate." The silence that followed was deafening. In 3,000 years of Krillian history, the Empire had never negotiated with an enemy. They conquered or they died trying. The concept of diplomatic solution was so foreign to their culture that many of the assembled generals didn't even understand what their leader was suggesting. "Negotiate?" Admiral Thekmar's voice was barely a whisper. "With humans?" "Look at the tactical display," Morthak ordered. "Really look at it. In 3 months, they've crippled our expansion into this sector, destroyed hundreds of our ships, and made it impossible for us to operate effectively in contested space. And they're doing it with improvised weapons and tactics that we don't understand." He activated another section of the display, showing strategic projections for the next year. The red zones continued to spread, consuming more and more Krillian territory. But it wasn't the territorial losses that made the projections so terrifying. It was the resource drain. Every ship lost to human attacks, every supply convoy destroyed, every facility abandoned because it couldn't be defended was bleeding the Empire's strength. "At current rates of attrition," Morthak continued, "we'll lose operational control of this entire sector within 18 months. Not because the humans can defeat our fleets in open battle, but because they're making it impossible for us to maintain our forces here." "What are you suggesting?" General Skax asked. "I'm suggesting that we've encountered something we've never faced before, an enemy that's fundamentally changing the nature of warfare itself. Traditional military doctrine doesn't apply when your opponent can appear anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish before you can retaliate." High General Morthak turned away from the tactical display and faced his assembled commanders. 3 months ago, we thought we were fighting a primitive species that would surrender after a show of force. Today, we're facing an enemy that's turning our own strengths against us. Every ship we deploy gives them another target. Every base we establish gives them another opportunity. Every patrol we send out gives them another chance to study our tactics. The recording of Helix Station continued to play on the secondary displays, showing the facility's final moments as Commander Kane's improvised bomb reduced the entire complex to expanding clouds of superheated gas. But it was what happened next that made even High General Morthak pause. As the explosion consumed the station, Kane's escape pod transmitted a message on all Krillian military frequencies. His voice was the same calm, conversational tone they'd heard before, but the words he spoke would haunt the Empire's leadership for months to come. "This is Commander Kane. I want to make something clear to whoever's listening. Every facility you've built, every ship you've launched, every weapon you've deployed, they all have weaknesses. And I'm going to find those weaknesses, exploit them, and teach others how to do the same. Your empire has spent 3,000 years conquering through superior force and intimidation. That time is over. Welcome to the age of asymmetric warfare." The message had been broadcast throughout Krillian space, carrying with it an implicit promise that made military planners on every world reconsider their defensive strategies. The humans weren't just fighting for their own territory. They were bringing their war to the Empire itself. High General Morthak made his decision. "Prepare a diplomatic envoy to Earth. We'll offer them generous terms for a ceasefire, recognition of their territorial sovereignty, trade agreements, mutual non-aggression pacts." "Sir," Admiral Vexhai said quietly, "what if they refuse?" Morthak looked once more at the tactical display. Watching the red zones spread like a virus through the Empire's outer territories. "Then we'll learn what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. And given what we've seen so far, I'm not confident which side will win that confrontation." As the War Council dispersed to carry out their orders, none of them noticed the small device that had been attached to the chamber's outer hull 3 days earlier. The device that had been recording every word of their deliberations. The device that was now transmitting those recordings to a human intelligence ship hiding in the system's outer asteroid belt. Commander Marcus Reaper Kane smiled as he reviewed the intercepted communications from his position aboard the stealth ship Ghost Protocol. The Krillians wanted to negotiate. That was good. It meant they were finally beginning to understand what they were really fighting against. But the war was far from over. The Krillians still held hundreds of worlds, still commanded vast fleets, still posed a threat to human colonies throughout the sector. Negotiation would buy Earth time to prepare its defenses and train more Reaper teams. But ultimately, there was only one way this conflict could end. The Krillian Empire had spent 3,000 years believing that might made right, that superior firepower could solve any problem. They were about to learn the most important lesson in human military history, that the only thing more dangerous than someone with superior weapons is someone with superior motivation. And humanity's motivation was simple. They were fighting for their homes, their families, their future. They were fighting for the right to exist in a galaxy that seemed determined to destroy them. The Krillians had claimed victory over a seal, but in doing so, they had awakened something that would change the nature of galactic warfare forever. They had created the Reapers, and the Reapers were just getting started.